Hello music lovers, welcome to another video. Thanks so much for dropping by and stopping by this channel. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to be doing a video about Yes here. This is going to be my State of the Onion address. And in case you don't know what the Onion is, then stay tuned. I'll be letting you know. But if you are a Yes fan, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's been quite an eventful year when it comes to Yes and its various offshoots. And I tried making this video back in June, but it just wasn't happening for one reason or another. I'm glad that I am doing it now because so much has happened. I think it's a much better video for it. So, I'm going to talk about what happened to Yes and the Yes family in 2019. Also, going to take a look back at some key moments in Yes history having to do with personnel changes and some name-related things. Also going to share with you my visit with Steve Howe back in 2000. I interviewed him, and I don't have the interview at my fingertips right now. I am getting closer to it, I think, but I'm getting some stuff out of storage, and I found some photos, so I'll share that with you. That'll be coming up later. Also, this great new interview with Rick Wakeman appeared in Rolling Stone magazine, and lots of great stuff talked about, and I'm going to be referencing that throughout this video. I'll be talking about that, and then also going to look ahead to 2020. What is up next for Yes and the Yes family next year? So that is all coming up in this video. All right, so the year started off with promise of there being a tour with Jon Anderson and Rick Wakeman and Trevor Rabin, ARW, but that didn't happen. There was supposed to be a new album. That didn't happen. Instead, we started hearing about Jon Anderson. He's got a new solo album. He's going to do a solo tour, and it's like, well, what the hell is going on with Yes? And on the other hand, it's like, well, there's nothing new. This is the way Yes is. We're not shocked that something fell through and didn't happen, and I'll be getting to that. But so yeah, Jon had this solo album that he had started back around 1990, and he decided to shelve it because of the Yes reunion that happened around that time, and he never got back to it. So now that he had some free time, wanted to create, he decided to pull this old project out, and he got some help, lots of different artists playing all over this album. That's why it's called 1,000 Hands. And so he puts out this solo album, and actually I think it's a pretty strong solo album. And I say that because I'm not really a big Jon Anderson solo fan. I like it when he collaborates with others. Otherwise, I think it's just a bit too much Jon. I love Jon, but he's a bit too cosmic and a bit too out there. He needs to be reined in by something. And Chris Squire and Steve Howe always did a great job of kind of like anchoring him. And so it's great when he works with others. This album has got some good stuff on it. Let me know what you thought about it. The tour was also a good tour. He had a good band with him, and they did his solo stuff. Probably about a third of it was his older catalog, a third was brand new stuff, and the other third was like Yes. And so he didn't go crazy and do anything Yes related that you're like, oh my God, I can't believe he did this. More the standard fare, like Owner of a Lonely Heart and Starship Trooper, that kind of stuff. But it was a good show. Would I have preferred to see Jon with Yes? Definitely, and that's part of the reason for this video. We'll be getting to that. But, Jon's actually working now on a book of his memoirs that's going to be released at some point. And so look out for that. That'll probably be out in 2020. But interesting to see what Jon has to say about Yes and their crazy history, which I'll be getting to. And then we had Yes go out on a tour this year, the Royal Affair Tour. And it had Carl Palmer, it had John Lodge of the Moody Blues, it had Asia, and of course Yes. And it's the kind of lineup that you expect to see on like a prog rock cruise. It's like they could have called this the Royal Caribbean Affair when you get down to it. A lot of these bands have actually played on cruises before. And really when you get down to it, there were a lot of tributes going on. Carl Palmer was paying tribute to Keith Emerson. Asia paid tribute to Greg Lake. John Lodge paying tribute to Ray Thomas. And of course, Yes paying tribute to Chris Squire. So a lot of, looking back on this tour. And as for Yes, you know, it saw them digging into stuff that they hadn't played in a long, long time, like The Gates of Delirium, which is a song that they hadn't played since the Masterworks tour. And I'll be talking about that actually later on. They pulled out No Opportunity Necessary. That was from Time and a Word. They hadn't played that literally from the 70s. And so they also dipped into some stuff that like Alan White had played on, like he played on Imagine by John Lennon, and they pulled that out. So it was starting to stretch into not only obscure Yes territory, but going into some solo offshoot type stuff. There was also a 50th anniversary documentary for Yes that was released this year, and it was just, what can I tell you? It was awful. I thought it was horrendous. It was shot in black and white, and let's face it, these guys are not getting any younger. It looked like the Night of the Living Dead. They didn't even use like microphones during the interviews. Very cheaply put together. No Jon Anderson, no Rick Wakeman. It was just totally, to me, just an embarrassment. It was so poorly done. So was not happy to see that. If you guys saw it, let me know. I'm going to drop it in a companion playlist to this video, which I will throw up a link to so you can check it out for yourself. And let me know what you think about it, all right? Something else that I thought was kind of screwy was I got this email from Ticketmaster letting me know about this 2-for-1 ticket sale going on with Yes on the Royal Affair Tour. And believe me, I've been to a lot of shows, bought a lot of concert tickets. I don't ever recall seeing, you know, buy one ticket, get one free. To me, that seems like a desperate move. And so I just took a look to see at one of the upcoming Yes shows. It was going to be in Nashville at the Grand Ole Opry. And I pulled up the tickets and I see just so many empty seats. And now it's starting to click why they're, you know, doing a buy one, get one free. And let me know if you got anything like this. I had really never seen anything like it. Maybe this is a new tactic, but I could only imagine it's done when the attendance is not quite what they're looking for. And there was another album that came out this year in the Yes family, and that was by the Steve Howe Trio and New Frontier. This just came out recently, and it's a great little jazzy album. I was surprised. It's a great Sunday morning album. If you want to have some Sunday morning jazz or something, it's great for that. He's got his son Dylan playing on drums. He's got a guy doing the Hammond organ. And it just kind of reminded me initially of like the first couple of Yes albums from 68 and 69. Even though Steve Howe didn't even play on those albums, he hadn't joined the band yet. It's almost like Steve Howe channeling Peter Banks in some ways. There's something about that guitar, you know, Hammond kind of a combo going on that's kind of reminded me of that era of the band Yes. But definitely cool jazzy album. Check it out if you're into that. Bill Bruford actually co-wrote 3 songs on the album, and I'm not sure which ones they are. If you happen to know exactly which ones they are, drop them down below in the comments. I'd love to know. So in this interview, Rick talks about what happened when Jon Anderson left the band for the first time in 1980, and he went along with him, and they were replaced by the Buggles, Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes, and I did a whole video about this. I'll put a link up to it, but it kind of ties into what's going on now. With Yes going on without Jon. And anybody who watches this channel knows that I'm no fan of Yes going on without Jon Anderson. You know, I think that Jon has a very unique voice, and it's crucial to the Yes sound. And it's just like you wouldn't put the Stones out on the road without Mick, and you wouldn't put Led Zeppelin out without Robert Plant, and I don't think you can put Yes out there without Jon Anderson. It just doesn't make sense. You have to have Jon. I'm not saying he's the only one, like Jon Anderson solo, his tour this year, that was not Yes. Because people will jump to the conclusion and say, oh, just because Jon's in it doesn't mean it's Yes. No, you got to have Chris too. Chris is a founding member. Chris was on every single album that Yes had its stamp on. And so you got to have the both of them, I would think. And so this happened once before in 1980 with the Drama album that they did with Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes. And it was a nightmare. That's what Rick Wakeman says that Chris Squire called it. And it really, when you get down to it, the record label had a whole tour booked for Yes in 1980. but yet Jon Anderson and Rick Wakeman had left. And so instead of canceling the tour, they just brought in these two guys, the Buggles, who had, this big hit with Video Killed a Radio Star, and they did a new album, and they hit the road. The fans had no idea what they were getting, and it didn't go over well. And so it was, that was it. Trevor Horn was done with the whole thing. He became a producer. But you look back on that whole thing and some great things came from it. Jeff Downes met Steve Howe. They wound up doing Asia, which was huge in 1982. Trevor Horn came back a few years later and produced the whole 90125 album, which was, Rick also talks about that being their most important album. Not their best album, but their most important album. It put Yes back on the map. And that whole 90125 album wasn't even supposed to be called Yes. It was supposed to be called Cinema. It was this band that Chris Squire had formed with Alan White and Trevor Rabin, this guitar player that they had picked up. And then, of course, Tony Kaye became a part of it, original Yes keyboard player. And then the record label wanted Jon Anderson. And so how could you not call it Yes? So it's like, this whole thing with the band going on without Jon and there being some screwy stuff with the name, because there's been talk about, well, why is, Jon Anderson's band with Rick Wakeman and Trevor Rabin now, why is it called Yes featuring A or W? Where did they get that from? So this whole thing with the name being screwy, this is nothing new for Yes. Calling it Yes when maybe it shouldn't be called Yes, this is the way Yes is. Going on without Jon, this is something that they had already tried. And I really didn't think that they were going to do it again. I thought that Yes learned their lesson after the whole drama fiasco. And after they decided to call it Yes when Jon came into the fold, because that's what the record label knew that they could sell. They couldn't sell cinema. What the hell is cinema? But we got this name Yes that used to be great, that we have a history with. We can sell that. We can put that on the road. And so it became more of a marketing thing and more of a management thing. But they knew when they brought Jon in that made it Yes, considering Chris Squire was also there. And so I really thought that there was going to be no more going on without Jon. Like that wasn't going to happen. But, what happens? Well, Rick talks about in the interview how, when the Yes tour ended in 2004, Jon wasn't feeling very, very well. He was very stressed out. He just, in terms of health, he was not in very good health. Fast forward 4 more years, 2008, they were getting ready to go on another tour. And Jon, he nearly died. He was in like this respiratory failure. And, Rick even talks about, he even says that Jon actually died, that they had to bring him back. And there's actually a pretty cool quote from Rick in the interview with Rolling Stone. I'll share it with you here. He says, what happened was Jon was very ill. He actually died. He was brought back to life. He was extraordinarily ill. And there was a conference call, which was Steve, Chris, and Alan. They said, look, Jon is obviously not well, but we're going to go out without him. I said, look, you can't go out without Jon. Zeppelin can't go out without Robert Plant. The Who can't go out without Roger Daltrey. When you have a distinguishable voice, you can't go out without it. They said, well, we are. We're going out without Jon. Are you in? I went, no. I think it's wrong, especially when you have Jon, who is really, really ill. I don't think it's right in any respect. Let the guy get better. Then we'll go out. No, we're going out now. I said, okay, good luck, but I can't do this. So at this point, you had Chris Squire and the band basically itching to get back on the road. We are at a point now where Journey has already proven that you can replace your lead singer with a guy who, comes from a tribute band, and you can sell out places. I think they saw that maybe as an inspiration. I'm not quite sure what drove this decision to cut Jon Anderson loose, but I think it was a crazy decision. Even though they brought in a guy named Benoit David, who I thought was a pretty good singer. He kind of reminded me of Trevor Horn more than Jon Anderson. He did the drama album stuff really, really well, but they could have formed a new band. But then you're in another position where it's like, well, this new band with Chris Squire and Steve Howe, and how do you market that? How do you start over? Well, you've got this band, Yes, and they are a classic band. So maybe Chris Squire was thinking more along the lines of the 90125 way of thinking of, well, we've got this actual brand name. What are we going to do? Let's just go out with another singer, a guy who's got a high voice and can sing the songs, and let's go do it. And what wound up happening was Benoit David, he got sick. He got a little bit of the sniffles. You can't have that. No. So they replaced him in 2012, and with this guy named Jon Davison, who is in the band now. He's the current lead singer. And Jon Davison, I've talked about him on this channel. Look, I am sure that Jon Davison is a cool guy, a good guy, and he may be a great singer in his own band. But seeing him in Yes, it doesn't do it justice. It falls short. It feels wrong, and it just doesn't sound interesting. I just don't find any pleasure in listening to Jon Davison sing the Yes material. I'm not interested. I don't give a shit. And there's something else going on presently with Yes that was also going on back in the early part of the 90s, and that is we've got two different camps of Yes going on. You had, back in the 90s, you had, Chris Squire working with Trevor Rabin and Alan White, and then you had Jon Anderson working with Steve Howe and Wakeman and Bruford for the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe. There were two distinct bands going on. And now we've got Yes Official, and we've got ARW. And we even had ARW go out as Yes featuring ARW. This happened after the whole Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. And Rick was against it. He talks about that in this interview. Trevor was too. They wanted to get together with Jon Anderson to play before they all dropped dead. And it kind of, like I said, nothing new. Go back to the whole thing going on in the early 90s with the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, and the other project. They decided at that point to bring them under one roof and call it the Union album. They basically had these two camps working on albums, and they hadn't finished. And so they decided, let's just bring these two unfinished projects under one roof, and let's call it Union, and we'll slap the name Yes on it, and they'll go out on tour. And the best thing about it was the tour, a great, great tour. It was great to see all those guys playing, but the album was anything but great. I mean, it may have had its moments, but what you've basically got here, and Rick talks about it, and it's very funny, this is where the whole Onion thing comes in. Rick said that when he heard the album, he wanted to cry because there were keyboard parts that he didn't play, and you had these two factions with their two projects that were being kind of managed by this producer who, Rick talked about how this producer shouldn't have been allowed with a food mixer, let alone a sound mixer. And he talked about how, everybody but the Pope played on this album. Like, there were so many people brought in, extra people. There were guitar parts and keyboard parts and who knows what that were not from Yes. They were from these other guys. And so the album, it may have had some cool songs or some cool bits, but there were also some, there was some strange stuff going on with this album, not a true Union the way it was sold. I know that myself, as a fan back in that time, I had no idea that it was going to be this big patch job with all these extra people playing and turn out to be such a disaster. And as I said, the Union tour was really cool. It was great to see them all performing, although Rick Wakeman talks in this interview about how Trevor Rabin and Steve Howe didn't quite see eye to eye. Like, for instance, they offered Steve to play the solo in Owner of a Lonely Heart. They thought fans would really think that was cool. Steve didn't even want to be on the stage, let alone play on the song. And so there was some friction going on, and Rick Wakeman doesn't seem to think that a reunion now would last more than a half hour. Like, it just is not on the cards. He even goes as far as to say that it's probably a better chance of Donald Trump divorcing his wife and marrying Hillary Clinton. So that's pretty much seals it, I think. All right, so here we are at the end of 2019. What is up for Yes in 2020, including the extended family? Well, the official Yes is going to be hitting the road next year. They've already got 8 dates in the UK announced, and there's going to be more coming for the rest of Europe. And they're going to be playing their 1974 album, Relayer, all the way through, all 3 songs. And this is something that I know a lot of diehard fans have been wanting to hear. You know, you've got The Gates of Delirium, which is, I think, one of their best songs. Sound Chaser, which is very, you know, jazz fusion-like. And you've got To Be Over, which I always thought was like a poor man's And You and I. It's an okay song, not one of my favorites, but Relayer, a very strong album. And I would love to go see this live. The problem is you don't have Jon Anderson, you know, so I really don't give a shit. I got to be totally honest with you. I'm not interested in seeing this particular lineup doing the Relayer album. I really don't care. Will it come to the U.S.? Probably will. You know, Yes has been doing this lately. They've been pulling albums out. Ever since they parted ways with Jon Anderson, they have been doing a lot of things that you know, I would say they're like wish list items for Yes fans. Like, yeah, play Close to the Edge all the way through. Sure, you know, play Going for the One, play Drama, play Tales from Topographic Oceans, and Relayer. It's only a matter of time before they do that. And so, you know, they've had guests. They had Trevor Horn on the last tour. They had Patrick Moraz, Tony Kaye. They've had Roger Dean signing albums, signing artwork and all that kind of stuff. And I think Yes are pulling out all the stops. They don't know what to do next. You know, let's play the Relayer album. It's what fans want. They are in diehard mode. They are appealing to the diehards, really, at this point. You know, I used to think that I was a diehard Yes fan, but then I see Yes fans who don't give a shit that Jon isn't there. You know, don't care that Chris isn't there, and that it's still called Yes. And Rick talks about this too in the Rolling Stone interview, and I'll share that with you too. He says, I think when Chris passed away, the name should have been retired and put on the shelf. Steve can carry on playing Yes music, same as we did. We were just as guilty calling it Yes featuring ARW, which I objected to vehemently. There's no reason we can't go out and play the music, but I really feel that the name should have been retired. I think it was disrespectful to Chris. There were all sorts of stories going around that, oh, Chris wanted it to continue. I know for a fact people that spoke to Chris, and that isn't true. If you want my real honest answer, the whole Yes thing is a mess since Chris died. It's a total and utter mess for the fans and the people because nobody knows what the hell is going on. Nobody knows who is in, who is doing what. It's just one hilarious mess. It would make a great cartoon series. And, you know, I think this quote from Wakeman is going to stir up some controversy within the Yes camp. You know, this whole bit about Chris Squire not wanting the band to go on without him as Yes. You know, I don't know who Rick was talking to, who he's talking about, but I know that if you ask Billy Sherwood this, he would say, yeah, Chris Squire did want the band to keep on going. Billy Sherwood was very close with Chris, and as far as he's concerned, you know, he passed the torch on to Billy Sherwood. Alan White is another story. You know, it's heartbreaking to watch him. You know, just here's some footage of Alan playing Gates of Delirium on the last tour, the Royal Affair. You know, it's heartbreaking to watch Alan. You know, he's had back issues, surgeries. Jay Shellen is playing drums for him. Jay Shellen used to play in Asia after Carl Palmer left. And so he's with Yes now, playing most of the drums in any Yes show that you go see now. So you don't have Alan White playing a lot. It's basically Steve Howe and, you know, Jeff Downs, who not a key member of Yes. Billy Sherwood, another one, not a key member. It's like, you know, it's like the Steve Howe tribute to Yes. I think calling it Yes is a mistake, you know, and if you want to do one more show with Steve and Jon, calling it Yes, one more tour, you know, bring in Rick and let's close it out. You know, that's really what needs to be done. But you can't have Yes really without Chris Squire and Jon Anderson, the two founding members, especially Chris. Chris was on every single Yes album, every single one. And no matter what was going on in Yes, no matter what bullshit was going on, Chris was always there, and without him, I agree with Rick, the proper thing to do is shut it down. You're not doing the band any great service by keeping the band going, just kind of hobbling around. What do you think? drop it down below and let me know. And, you know, as for Jon Anderson and Trevor Rabin and Rick, ARW, they are planning, I haven't heard anything official, but they are looking to go out for one final tour. That's what Rick says. He talks about his health. He's got arthritis, and he doesn't believe that he's going to be able to play past 2022. You know, he thinks that he's got a couple more years left, and he doesn't want to go out there and play, you know, 75% or 50% of what he can do. He feels like he can still do a great job, but he's only got a couple years left, and I respect him wanting to go out on top. Nothing announced officially yet. I wouldn't look for any new album from ARW. Rick also talks about that, how they tried to make a new album, and you know, just between the finances, nobody wanted to really pay for that kind of a project. You know, everybody in the band lives in different places, all over the world. So getting everybody in the same room to work on something new is like impossible. This is part of the reason why Jon Anderson left and went solo and decided to do a solo album and a solo tour, getting back to how this whole video started. ARW just couldn't get on the same page financially and logistically to get anything done. All right, so to wrap this whole thing up, you know, I have very fond memories of Yes, going to see Yes. As a matter of fact, you know, I feel very fortunate that I got to meet most of the guys in Yes, most of the key players. Steve Howe is one of them, and one of my fondest memories of Yes is going to see them on the Masterworks tour. I got to see them at Jones Beach in the summer of 2000. And I went there to go see them at that particular show because I was going to interview Steve Howe. And I'm trying to get my hands on that interview. Now that I'm digging into my stuff that I've got in storage, I might be getting close to it. But I did unearth a bunch of photos. And so I've got some photos of my time at the show and also with Steve Howe. I'll throw that up there. Steve Howe looks like, you know, who the hell is this guy? You know, but, you know, I remember when I went to go interview him, he asked me to give him about a half hour, that he had to meditate. And so I was like, all right. So I waited a half hour, came back, and then he was like, you know, you want to go get something to eat? So, of course, they had a caterer there for all of the band and the roadies and all that. And so I had dinner with Steve Howe, and that was really cool. You know, it was, you know, light talk, you know, and after that, we went back to his room and I interviewed him for about, I don't know, it seemed like about 45 minutes or so. And this is, you know, people have called me a Jon Anderson ass kisser because I interviewed Jon Anderson. I have that interview up here on my channel. I'll put a link up to that. And people think that I favor Jon. I'm all about Jon. And, you know, the truth is that, you know, I became a Steve Howe fan as soon as I heard him, straight away. First time I ever heard Steve Howe was in Asia. Just because of the time when I was born and started listening to the radio. And once I heard Asia, I was like, who is this guy on guitar? And when I heard the first Asia album, you know, I just loved his guitar work, and then started getting into Yes and, you know, really started to enjoy his guitar work. Of course, a lot more instruments, more, you know, played acoustic guitar and, you know, all kinds of instruments. And I enjoyed his solo albums. I was always a very big Steve Howe fan. And so it was a real pleasure to get to meet him and to get to spend time with him. And so if I can get my hands on that interview, I will definitely upload it to this channel. I'll let you know. Also got to meet Chris Squire and Alan White. And hopefully I can get my hands on those photos. I think I know where those are. And I might have that interview too. And so what I'm trying to say is I've got a lot of fond memories of going to see Yes. And Yes was always Chris Squire and Jon Anderson. And of course, Steve Howe, a major part of that. But really, Chris Squire and Jon Anderson are the core of Yes. They're founders of the band. And I don't think you can have a version of the band without them in it. I really don't. And, you know, I would hope that something could happen in the future where Jon Anderson and Steve Howe can get together. It doesn't have to be under the Yes name. It can be something else. Those two are a great pair, and I think they could put on some great shows with, regardless really of who they're working with. It would be great to see them back again. You know, Jon Anderson has even mentioned that he has songs ready for another Yes album, songs that he think would be really good. I think he said he's got about 8 things written, and he's appealed to Steve Howe to do one more final Yes album, but I don't know that Steve wants to go down the final route. You know, Rick is talking about going out on one final tour with John and Trevor Rabin. So in 2020, we could have a tour that's like a Rick Wakeman goodbye tour. And it's a shame that we can't have Steve be a part of that. Let me know what you think. What do you think about the state of the onion? You can probably figure out why I'm calling it the onion here, because when you peel away the layers and you look at all that's going on here, all that is and all that has been, it's pretty sad. And, you know, hopefully things can get resolved. But let me know what you think. You know, what do you think about Yes? What do you think about these different factions and the name changes and the personnel changes? Have you heard Jon Anderson's new album, Steve Howe's new album? Put that down below. Are you going to go see Yes in 2020? Did you see him this year on the Royal Caribbean Affair? Let me know what you think about all that. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button too. I've got videos coming for Rick Ocasek of the Cars, you know, going to talk about him and what a loss that is. And also I've got concert reviews for Iron Maiden and Sammy Hagar, going to talk some Van Halen and a whole lot more. It's coming. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and I'll be talking to you soon. All right, take care.